Welcome to SmartShare Housing Solutions, where we have been creating housing solutions by working to connect people and homes since 2017. SmartShare Housing Solutions is a nonprofit organization with no financial interest in any product or service. Our goal is to create sustainable, affordable housing in San Luis Obispo County. In this video, we'll go over 10 basic steps to legally install a tiny home on wheels. We use a tiny home installation in the city of Arroyo Grande as our example. Rules and regulations differ in every jurisdiction, so be sure to do your research before starting your own tiny home on wheels installation. Many of the topics will be relevant to a variety of scenarios, so we hope you'll learn something useful, even if you're not living in Arroyo Grande. If you are living in Arroyo Grande, we hope you will find step number 6, the details about how to apply for a permit, particularly helpful. In Arroyo Grande, tiny homes on wheels are legal to use as an alternative to building another dwelling unit on your property and has a specific definition. A tiny home on wheels is a type of pre-manufactured home built on a chassis and intended for separate, temporary, independent living quarters for one household and meets the following conditions. It must be a self-contained unit that includes facilities to support daily living routines. It must be licensed and registered with the DMV. It must be towable and cannot move under its own power with a minimum of 100 square feet and a maximum of 400 square feet, and shall comply with standards of the appropriate code regulations as determined by the building official. If you aren't sure about the differences between an ADU, a tiny home on wheels, and an RV, you can get more information by watching our video, ADU Webinar Arroyo Grande, in the How to ADU playlist on our YouTube channel. Find the link in the video description. A tiny home on wheels, or a THOW, has several advantages over building a new structure. Because tiny homes on wheels are manufactured in a factory, they can be less expensive, as well as built and installed faster than a typical building, and without running into the kinds of delays you get with one-off designs. Using a tiny home on wheels as an ADU helps strengthen the community by adding much-needed flexible housing options. Because they are small, they can be used as infill development. They can also be built sustainably and therefore have a smaller impact on the environment. Tiny homes on wheels are a valuable way to provide homes for the increasing number of single-person households, which currently is over 25% of all American households. Before buying a tiny home on wheels, it's important to think about your own goals and needs. Begin with the end in mind. What are you trying to accomplish by adding a tiny home on wheels to your property? If you want extra income, you might make different choices than if you are trying to increase your property value or have to find a place for a family member to live quickly. Lauren and Brandon chose to install a tiny home on wheels on their property because it was less expensive than building something from the ground up and less expensive than adding a unit over the garage. They were interested in sustainability, providing housing for the community, and extra income. They were inspired after attending SmartShare's workshop sponsored by the city of Arroyo Grande. Theirs was one of the first tiny homes on wheels installed in Arroyo Grande, and SmartShare was happy to help guide them through the process. Let's break the process down into 10 steps. Following each of these 10 steps can help ensure that your tiny home on wheels is installed correctly and is compliant with local codes, so you can use it as an accessory dwelling unit right away, rather than having to take time and money to make it compliant later on, or worse, having it red tagged. Step 1. First and foremost, make sure tiny homes on wheels are legal where you live. You can often find these codes online. The link in the description will help you search for codes in jurisdictions all over the United States. It's a good idea to print your own copy of these ordinances or a checklist on what is needed to install a tiny home on wheels, if you can find one. If your jurisdiction doesn't allow tiny homes on wheels, reach out to your city council members or supervisors and explain to them how tiny homes on wheels can help them meet their affordable housing goals. Step number 2. Once you understand the regulations, make sure that your property will be able to accommodate them. Do you have enough space to allow for proper setbacks, as well as ingress and egress of the home? In other words, how will you get your tiny home in and out? Will you need a crane? Consider where utilities are located. If there isn't already an RV pedestal, how will you get utilities to the site? And what will it take for them to meet code? If you have questions, reach out to your city or county planning or building department. Once you've looked at all the code requirements and considered the unique setting of your own property, you'll need to draft a site plan. You can draw the site plan yourself or hire a professional. If your site has a slope or drainage issues or other complications, you'll probably want to consult with a civil engineer and have them draw up your site plan. Here's Anne to explain the purpose of a site plan for Lauren and Brandon's tiny house on wheels.
The site plan wants to tell the story of the whole site. So the size of the site, the property lines, how close the home is to the setbacks. For example, the Arroyo Grande requires 4 feet from a side or back set line, and your home will be just 4 feet on one side. So your site plan will clearly show that you're at the 4 feet requirement from the sideline. It'll also show the size of the primary house and distances from other structures so that anyone reviewing this can see that the project complies with the codes. In addition then to the measurements in the site plan will also have call-outs kind of describing the code sections and how the projects meets those. These are things that can be done by a homeowner using tools like a Google kind of map that can plot the existing structures on the parcel. And by using tools like county assessor maps and planning GIS systems that are available to the public to get property dimensions for use, and then to plot in their project for an ADU or a tiny home on wheels. It can be a little daunting for people who haven't done it before. And in general, planning departments will accept hand-drawn maps. So people don't have a lot of technical skills can still do this.
Once the site plan is finished, you'll turn the site plan into your community planners or building department, and you'll also need to use the site plan to get estimates from contractors. So it's important to have accurate information. Step 4. Consider whether you have the financial resources to complete the entire project and how your proposed project will help you meet your overall goals. The project budget shown here is a best-case scenario. You'll want to consider questions such as, how much will the home cost? What kind of site work is there to do in preparation? If there is a retaining wall involved, the price will be much higher. What is the permitting process and how much will it cost? What will the insurance cost? Will it need to be shipped, and how much will that cost? Does the project meet your financial objectives? And what is the payback period? Step 5. It's fun to shop and look at the endless possibilities, but there are some important things to consider before purchasing your tiny home on wheels. First, ensure that your tiny home on wheels meets your personal criteria. Second, ensure that it meets the regulations, codes, and ordinances where you live. And third, be on the lookout for scammers. There are a variety of certifications that tiny home on wheels factories apply for. These certifications are important to municipalities because they show that the structure has been built to specific standards of safety. Check your local ordinances to find out which ones are accepted where you live. RVIA or NOAH are very common. There are many tiny home on wheels manufacturers. 2 on the Central California coast are Pacifica Tiny Homes and Central Coast Tiny Homes. We recommend buying new with a factory warranty and certification. A certification is required by most jurisdictions. It's also easier to avoid scams when buying directly from the manufacturer. If you are considering buying a used tiny home on wheels, be sure to take care to avoid common scams. In the next 2 slides, we'll go over a few things to do and watch out for. When searching for a used tiny home on wheels, be sure to use a reputable website. Lauren and Brandon used tinyhousesociety.com and had a good experience. Make sure there is a real person involved by meeting them either virtually or in person. Contact the factory that built the home to verify the VIN or other information. Make sure the home is certified and get everything in writing. Don't let anyone rush you. Rushing people into making bad decisions is a common scam tactic. Be sure to get bids from several different haulers and don't default to the cheapest one without more research. Haulers should be bonded, insured, and permitted. Check references as well. If you are purchasing the home without visiting it in person, have a third party inspect it, like the Tiny House Society. You should also expect your hauler to want to inspect it both before and after hauling. Again, we recommend buying new from reputable factories with warranties, which will help you avoid a lot of scams and also facilitate certification of your home. But as you'll see, Brandon and Lauren's experience buying a used tiny home on wheels worked out just fine. Step number 6. This section of the video is about filling out the permit application, specifically for Arroyo Grande, California. Some parts may apply no matter where you live. Also, since tiny homes on wheels aren't always accounted for in codes or well understood by city staff, this part of the video may be helpful if you need to advocate for changes or updates to your city's processes. If you don't live in Arroyo Grande and don't want to learn about the permit application process, you can skip to step number 7.
And so with that, let's get right to the permit application itself. We know that in Arroyo Grande, there's an online portal. The permitting is all online. So let's we'll take a look at the online portal and open up the application, see what we have. Okay, so we've got the application open here, or the portal for the city of Arroyo Grande. So walk us through it, Lauren.
Okay, so with the help of City Hall staff, it was really simple to figure out how to get started with the permit process. You create a permit account. I logged in. For a tiny home specifically, you're going to go under Building and Engineering Permits, and you click on Apply for a Permit, which
Okay.
Building Permit, and then subtype is going to be Residential Alteration, and then description of work is tiny home addition. All right, so I entered my address, it found the location. And then a tiny home, you'll check for building, even though it's already built, that's the work type that's going on. And then for a question, is this an ADU project? It is not. An ADU is different than a tiny home. So you'll check no. You will do a simple Google search to access your APN number for your property. If it's a new, so it would be no, because it is not a new construct ADU building. And so really going through everything to see what applies to your situation. And it's okay to ask your city staff if you have questions. Owner builder exempt, because we have done builder solid.
Okay, so that's excluding you from workman's comp because you're declaring you're your own contractor. Okay, great. And so with building type then, I mean, it could really be called new or addition or I'm not sure what they mean by revision exactly, but I would be inclined to click addition, but one can see how tiny houses on wheels don't necessarily fit into the standard boxes at all.
After filling out the online form, Lauren's application required several attachments. Brandon and Lauren had to submit a photo of their house, a specification sheet, usually available from the manufacturer, a floor plan of the house, proof of certification, and a site plan. Every jurisdiction can have different requirements, and they may evolve in Arroyo Grande as well. There are 3 documents that might be difficult for the average homeowner to work with: the Stormwater Post-Construction Requirements Waiver Request Form, the Stormwater Plan Application, and the Minor Project Water Pollution Control Plan. Let's look a little closer at each of the last 3 with Lauren.
There are a couple more requirements that Arroyo Grande has that we may expect to see in other jurisdictions too. And so these are some standard forms around protecting water flow and stormwater. Here we have a stormwater post-construction requirements waiver request form from the city of Arroyo Grande. And just the name of this thing can be daunting, but we want to show you here how this is actually an easy one to get through. And so with that, let's look through it. Section 1 is project information. So when you filled in your application for a permit, you should have been issued a permit number. So that would go in the first section along with applicant name and address.
And would there be, in this case, an engineering permit number? And would there
Good question. It's asking for that there too, but since this home is pre-engineered and we're not doing any engineering or wall work, we wouldn't have an engineering permit. If you had that, if your project involved a retaining wall or something and there was engineering too, that would go there. And then going to section 2, reasons that the project should be waived from compliance with this form. So we've got 3 boxes here to check. And so we can check the first box for this project, that this tiny house on wheels creates or replaces less than 2,500 square feet of impervious area. This box is going to be applicable to people installing an ADU that can only be up to 1,200 square feet, or a tiny house on wheels like Lauren's that's only 350 square feet. Even if there were a larger pad area being poured for some base work, it wouldn't be anywhere near the 2,500 square foot exemption. And under that box, we can see that that allows us to skip on the form to 5A, 5B, and 6. So we can jump right down there to find 5A. And that is other potentially applicable post-construction regulations. And I'm shuddering, and I'm a planner on this. So projects not subject to PCRs may still be required to comply. Ooh, we don't want to hear that. Due to the area of disturbance. Luckily, we can see here that we have a box right there that says not applicable, because the area of disturbance is less than 1 acre. Our whole site is only about 1/7 of an acre. So even if we were doing our whole site, we'd be well under this 1 acre allowance. So that means we can check the not applicable box. And so then we can go to number 6.
Well, it's just the signature.
And so we've gotten through this PCR's form with really filling in 3 lines and checking a couple of boxes. So let's look at the couple of other stormwater required forms, similar to what you may see in other jurisdictions. The City of Arroyo Grande's stormwater plan application. So on this, we're making a plan to deal with stormwater. And these storms are for good reason. If we have big storms during construction, we don't want a lot of debris clogging up and running into our waterways. So they're for good reason. Section 1 wants the applicant information, so all pretty no-brainer there of address and name and contact info. And then Section 2 wants a little more detailed project information. So we're telling it here that this is a THOW installation, a tiny house on wheels, putting in our building number, permit again, our property APN and address, and again describing the project, installing a tiny house on wheels in the side yard. And
My tendency would be to write like an essay right there, but you get 1 line.
That's right. No more information than necessary. And so one important line on this section on the project information, because we're dealing with runoff and stormwater here, is the question about distance to nearest creek or storm drain. And so this is one that we had to think about a little, where this site is draining off to. And it's not something I had noticed on my visits to the site. And it's not something that my Google Maps search of the curbs on the block could tell me. So Lauren and Brandon had to go out and hunt for the nearest storm drain, which they found at the end of the street, as I understand it. So we've checked their runoff is going into a storm drain that's several hundred feet from their home. Basically, this is telling us water isn't running off right off into a creek, and that this storm drain is quite some distance from the home. So we've got that, and then we also have section 2B, what is this? And we've checked it's a minor project, because again, It's a very small project, and that's confirming it in section 3 that's asking us what the project area is. And on this, we've filled in the whole area of Lauren and Brannon's property. It's roughly 68 feet wide by 85 feet deep, comes out to 5,700 some feet. And so our impervious area on the site is basically their existing home and garage. So that leaves the pervious area of yard more or less 4,300 square feet. And then when we fill in the section for post-project areas, it's all the same. Because this tiny house on wheels is sitting on a gravel pad, which is considered an impervious surface.
It's not impervious.
That's right. A pervious surface means water can seep through it. And so concrete is generally considered impervious, that the water hits and runs off the concrete. But gravel type bases, then water can flow through the gravel. What we're showing here is that the impervious surface area hasn't changed at all. And this is a tiny project not changing the water flow. And so then does this project create or replace 2,500 square feet of impervious surface area? No, we've established that on our last form, so this aligns. And then we can skip to section 6 because we've answered no there. And here we have to check a couple boxes that look a little tricky. So on this, we've got to check that we have these 3 forms that we're going over now. This stormwater plan application, the water pollution control plan that we're going to go over, and the PCR waiver. So these are the 3 forms that we need to fill out and we're working on as part of our attachments. And again, they look ominous, but really it's a matter of finding the exemptions here for small projects that they allow. Here we have the City of Arroyo Grande's minor project water pollution control plan, one of the required attachments. And this is another document that's showing the city that you have a plan for controlling water runoff, so we minimize pollution to the local waterways. And so this plan came pre-checked. We didn't actually have to check any of these boxes. But so this is pointing out best management practices, BMPs, for the things to be done to protect our waterways. And so these are things that people can go through as far as equipment maintenance, managing stockpiles of supplies to make sure they're covered, and sweeping up and managing spills. These are things that all people doing any construction should do to make basic protections to protect water supplies. So other things like vacuuming, saw cut slurry, the little dust that comes off of our construction materials, sometimes that has plastic or some composition that we don't want blowing around and getting in the water. And so these are all things to do and don't need a lot of description. This is only the second tiny home on wheels to be installed in Arroyo Grande. So it's worth noting their planning department is still watching how this plays out and how much time they have to spend on these permits and how their process goes. So Lauren and Brandon are still guinea pigs in that respect.
Once we found our tiny home that we liked, I went straight to City Hall, showed them the spec sheet, all the information I knew about it. They reviewed it for me within a day, and they said, yes, this home will meet our requirements. Here's your next step. And so we've had A to Z, everything that the county needs for us to be compliant, and we've followed all of that to a T. And so we know from our end, all of the steps we've done are going to be approved because it's meeting their standards.
So I know the plan is to get these final documents to the city and have the application deemed complete. So for everyone who's listening who hasn't done building and permits before, basically you start a process of an application and get some information in, but your application isn't complete until the jurisdiction you're applying to has deemed it complete. It's quite typical that you'll turn in some information, but it's not clear enough or not extensive enough to meet the requirements of the jurisdiction. So there's often some back and forth there to get them information that they need. And so it's a real milestone then once the jurisdiction deems your application complete. And so after the deemed complete date, what does the city staff give you for expected timing?
So once staff said that once we submit our application, so we're just waiting on our site plan and then our application will be complete. It takes about 2 weeks for the planning and building department to review that. And then they'll contact us to schedule an inspection. And since we know that everything we have been doing is everything they've told us to do, we expect that they'll be here, they'll say it looks great, and they'll sign off on it.
Well, we certainly hope so too, and looking forward to that happening soon.
I know that you found your tiny house in Colorado, so it's coming across the country to get here, and you're preparing right now to have it installed, and here we are filling out the forms. Is this going to be a problem? Like, how is it important to turn these well in advance, or what's the order of operations here?
Yeah, so in all of the research, and I had the same questions too, can we even have a tiny home on our property before the permits, and what's the order of operation? And you can legally have a tiny home on your property, provided it meets the setback requirements and everything. But what you need a permit for is it to be a dwelling.
Okay, well, with that, I think we've gone over the permitting. And again, important to remind anyone listening that your jurisdictions who allow tiny homes on wheels may have different processes, but we hope that using this Arroyo Grande process as an example could help you get your tiny house on wheels installed.
Step 7. Utilities. Unless you already have utility connections ready, you'll need to provide them. Required utilities include fresh water, wastewater, and electricity. This will likely take the form of an RV pedestal, but check your local ordinances to make sure. An RV pedestal makes it easier to disconnect if the day ever comes that you need to remove the tiny home on wheels. Optional utilities could be gas and internet. Professional electricians and plumbers will be needed to install utilities if you don't have them already. Step 8. Construct the base. The base your tiny home on wheels sits on is important for safety, durability, and stormwater regulations. There could be a variety of ways to meet this requirement, including concrete, asphalt, gravel, geogrid, or pavers. Keep in mind that concrete and asphalt are generally impervious, meaning that water can't penetrate them. This creates runoff during rainy times and can lead to stormwater considerations. Be sure your chosen base materials meet requirements for subsoil's depth and material thickness. Our sample project in Arroyo Grande used geogrid with gravel to provide a nice base for the tiny home on wheels. Step 9. Installation. Now that you have a permit application approved, a home purchased, a pad prepared, insurance, and utilities, it's time to install. During installation, make sure your tiny home on wheels is in the right place, observing all setbacks. Be prepared to install any required or desired accessory items, like skirting, decking, stairs, or screens. Hook up the utilities and make sure they work. Call your jurisdiction to make an appointment for final approval. They will send an inspector out to make sure it's all done to code. Finally, it's time to move in. You may be planning to live in the tiny home on wheels yourself or renting it out. Regardless, you'll want to make sure it passes final inspection prior to anyone moving in. If your tiny home on wheels is near the primary residence, you may want to provide privacy screening in the form of fences or landscaping. You may also want to provide some outdoor areas for the tiny home on wheels residents as well as storage. If you plan to rent the space, you can check out online services like Zillow, Airbnb, or FurnishedFinders.com, Craigslist, or Facebook Marketplace. Of course, let your friends, family, and colleagues know you're looking for a renter as well. Thank you for taking the time to watch this video, with special thanks to Brandon and Lauren and the City of Arroyo Grande. If you found this video helpful, please like, share, or comment. We'd love to hear about your tiny house journey. Stay inspired, and we'll see you in the next video. For more information on accessory dwelling units and tiny homes on wheels, visit our website, smartsharehousingsolutions.org, or email us at info@smartsharehousingsolutions.org. Thanks for watching.